And it's not uncommon to see them breaking the speed limit. And so we have a lot of work to do with commercial vehicle fleets and work with them to ensure that their drivers are driving safely. They are governed by a lot of health and safety regulations, and unfortunately, traffic safety has only become one of the recent additions to their portfolio. So a special attention needs to be brought to how can we encourage our fleets that are driving the highways outside of the Lower Mainland to have safe drivers. And the fourth thing that I think is very important in the components of the safe system is post-crash response. And we have many health units and people represented from the emergency medical services. This is vital on our rural roads because people can be injured in crashes and they are hours away from a destination such as a medical center or a hospital. And in my work overseas, when I talk about first responders, what I've termed in some places that the first responder is often the next road user who's going to come along. So a lot of the places I work in, you actually have to have a first aid certificate or have been to a course to show how to prevent an injury becoming more serious, what to do if you come across the scene of a crash, and how can you prevent that injury worsening before the arrival of the professionals, because the first responder is often not a qualified person. So we do need to pay attention to that. We need to look at how we can get injured people attended to quickly by quick response and how they can be transferred to a hospital or a trauma unit in the most efficient manner. So that sets a little bit of general background into road safety issues on rural roads. I'd like to introduce the two speakers now, and their bios are in the program in case you didn't listen to what Megan said. And so I'd just like to ask them, they're going to co-present this session, and then we'll hopefully have some time for questions and answers after it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And actually yesterday we were traveling down from Salmon Arm, and I was one of those people. So there was a big semi truck that was jackknifed on the Trans-Canada on a blind corner, and I was out the second person on the scene. And so I pulled over and was directing other cars to slow down before they got to that accident scene. So to your point. So thanks very much. I think we're going to bring up our, oh, we have the, does it go up? Oh, there we go. Awesome. Great, thank you. So welcome everyone, and thank you for having us here. And my name is Anita Ely, and this is Phil McIntyre Paul, and we're do some work together and community partners. So the first thing we'd like to do is acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Semiahmoo, the Katzie, Kiwetlam, Kwantlen, Kikite, and Tsawwassen nations, which is where Surrey is today. And where we're from, the Shuswap region, which is the main subject of this presentation, and we're going to do a bit of a case study, is where we live and we work, and it is within the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. Okay, so here's the presentation outline. These are the points that we'll be briefly reflecting on as we take it from a rural perspective. And many of the things that were said today, kind of the themes are coming through. They're the same for us, but we're going to present them in a little bit more of a rural context. Okay, so first of all, we were asked to sort of include a little bit about why involve the health authority. So from my perspective, my job, I'm an environmental health officer, and my reason for being, the reason that my passion comes from, is promoting, preventing, and protecting the population overall. And so working with Phil and other community partners, I'm able to build the community's capacity. I can broker relationships, advocate and use evidence-informed information, and provide a whole bunch of resources to communities. Phil?
So for us, we've been working formally for about 15 years, building coalitions and collaboration. And what the Shuswap Trail Alliance is actually a nonprofit organization that was created by regional partners, including Secwepemc Municipal and regional governments to get people working together and to become a vehicle, because we've got multiple regional districts and municipalities. So we've been working for about 15 years trying to move this agenda forward. And when Interior Health came with the new program for preventative health that included healthy built environments, suddenly we had this new partner. And what we found was there was a whole new legitimacy that was brought to the work that we were doing. And that included a major shift, an advocacy for shift to health being a core part of what we were doing. And then finally, resources and best practices. We've been pulling resources and doing what we could within the means that we had and the capacity that we had. But all of a sudden we found this major player that had come to the table with all of these threads and connections and resources and information and evidence. So those were three and it was interesting because we actually felt that substantially in the last 5 or 6 years that we've been working together.
Okay, so the health folks in this room recognize this, I'm sure, this slide. This is about the physical and social determinants of health and about what influence our health, what causes us to be healthy in the first place. So each person's experiences with these factors shape the life and ultimately their health outcomes. And in the rural and remote context, people have to routinely travel into centers to access education, work, medical services, and daily amenities. And there was some talk this morning about equity. And First Nations reserves and quite often the least expensive housing is located on the outskirts or outside of a town. And so then the distance and the dangerous connectivity options to bring people into town, they become barriers to health, barriers for lots of things in their life, but barriers to health as well. And especially for people with low income and are also experiencing other challenges. So just a quick context. This is a map of interior health. It's quite large. There's 215,000 square kilometers for interior health, population of just over 750,000, 60 municipalities, 54 First Nations communities. We have Métis communities, regional districts, school districts. Our smallest community is a population of 195 people. This is incorporated community, and our largest is 125,000, which is Kelowna. There's also, I don't even know, I haven't counted how many unincorporated little settlements throughout all of those regional districts. So just bringing in it a little bit closer, this is the Shuswap context. It's fairly typical. So I don't know if you can see at the back, but this is a map of the Okanagan. We're at the top. Vernon is a bit in the center, and Kelowna is at the bottom, and Kamloops is on your left side. So communities are often not compact, and reserves and rural settlement areas are often located on the outskirts of larger centers. Communities are often not complete, so that means that people living in rural settlements and small towns must travel to larger centers for school, for work, medical centers, grocery stores, and all the other routine amenities. This causes people to travel around the region, and mostly in single occupancy vehicles. There is very little transit throughout the entire interior region. Some of the cities have them, but not between communities. And even people living in Salmon Arm, which is a fairly, relatively large community, it's about 25,000 people, they regularly travel. So I live in Salmon Arm. We regularly travel to Vernon, Kamloops, Kelowna for such things as medical appointments or sporting events or just to go shopping. So communities are often not well connected for active transportation, and highways with narrow gravel shoulders and fast moving vehicles, including transport trucks, often bisect the towns and are the only way reserve settlement areas and small communities are connected to the large centers. So it forces people to either walk along the highway or just not come into town. And if the other alternative option in the top picture is actually Salmon Arm, and on the top left-hand portion, there's some reserve land, some communities outside of town. And instead of taking the long route along the highway, some people will use or choose to use the railway track. And there have been multiple fatalities, many actually, on the railway track because they're choosing the railway track as safer, more aesthetically pleasing than the highway. Okay, So this is just, I was kind of curious, a bit of a snapshot. I was just wondering about, to understand the data and a little bit of a rural context compared to the urban, and then also around different parts of the province. So this is just a snapshot. I've chose one urban area or one urban community and one rural community from each health authority. And so the yellow are the urban communities, the green are the rural communities, roughly. And you can see that there's a bit of a difference. And this indicator, potential years of life lost index, this indicator contributes to an understanding of the adequacy and effectiveness of injury prevention efforts, including public education, product development and use, community and road design, and prevention and treatment resources. And this information has just come from the BC Community Health Profiles. Another little bit of information just for some context. This is standardized mortality ratio by cause of death. And this compares the number of deaths that occurred in a geographic region. The top chart is related to interior health, and the bottom chart is related to Salmon Arm local health area. And you'll notice that on the both of red circles on the far side have the highest ratio is for motor vehicle. It says accidents, but apparently that's a taboo word. So motor vehicle crashes. Okay. So when we consider equity, we talked a little bit about that this morning. Equality means everyone gets the same resource. So at the front top image there, you can see everybody gets a bicycle. It's all the same size bicycle. One person can't even use a bicycle, but they get one anyway. Equity is about providing proportional support that matches the need of each individual, and in this case, in this image. But I think that the same thinking can be applied to communities as well. It is about understanding the local context and providing the resources which would best fill in the gaps for that particular community. Some communities have teams of expertise, whereas rural communities may only have a CAO, a Chief Administrative Officer, and perhaps one other staff member for everything that they do. So it is not just about providing funding through grants and what have you, which can be used to bring in a consultant. It's also about tailoring the support each community needs to follow a healthy community approach to community development. So the healthy community approach, the World Health Organization first put this together. It considers the social, economic, environmental, and physical factors that influence the health and well-being of individuals and builds on a community's existing capacity. There are 5 strategies, and we heard talk about them this morning, that many of the activities are happening already in all these communities or following some of these strategies. First one is political commitment, healthy public policy, multi-sectoral collaboration, community citizen engagement, asset-based community development. And so in the Shuswap in recent years, these 5 components of healthy community approach have started to come together, and we're starting to see some success. And I'm going to pass it to Phil.
Which one am I pushing?
The big green button.
Excellent. That's easy. I can do that. Thanks, Anita. And thanks for this opportunity for us to bring the rural perspective to an important conversation. In terms of the collaboration that we've seen over the last 15 years, I think it's fair to say that the collaboration and the relationships that are being built are the success, and then the challenges we'll talk about in a moment here. But one of the big changes that we've seen in the last 15 years is that we've gone from a very, very robust conversation about why do this, why is this important, to why not, why aren't we doing this? And there's a certain expectation now, particularly from our leadership. We've seen that in the political commitment in moves, for example, like last year, unanimously, every municipal and regional political official in the region, supported by the 4 Secwepemc governments in the region, unanimously moved a motion through their local government association, through UBCM, and then to the province and to the Minister of Infrastructure and Transportation, unequivocally saying that there was a unanimous agreement that any new Ministry of Transportation infrastructure development within the road right-of-way needed to incorporate active transportation corridors into all current and future highway upgrade projects. Don't ask us if we think this is important. Assume that every single rural road in our region it's a priority, because that's what they've heard in the planning, and the local politicians are hearing that again and again from local communities. So it was a fairly unequivocal shift from 15 years ago when we were having a conversation about why to why not. And then financially, everyone has partnered to say, let's work together and collaborate, and has created what's currently known as the Shuswap Regional Trails Roundtable. And trails is an interesting word because it's been the thing that's brought us all together. But whenever we strategically plan together, active transportation corridors are a key part of that. So effectively, the conversation in the roundtable and the relationships are really prioritizing conversations around safety in the rural area. And that multi-sectoral collaboration and community citizen engagement has gone on to manifest itself in a whole series of municipal, regional, and Secwepemc First Nations government-to-government agreements, and the Shuswap Roundtable itself. And it's interesting, the Roundtable was the first time the Secwepemc First Nations governments, municipal and regional governments, all unanimously signed an agreement and said, we're going to work together. And as part of that, also acknowledged that they were, that title and rights were a component of that, and reconciliation was a key part of it. The other shift we've seen is from why not very, very quickly to how. How do we do this? It's not just a question of, hey, this is a good idea, but there's a deep desire to see things move forward. So we're seeing that in healthy public policy. We've got a number of active transportation strategies that have emerged from all of the small communities. And the list here is essentially every small municipal community within the regional Shuswap area. And then there's some major asset-based community development initiatives. And one of those includes the Sicamous to Armstrong Rail Trail acquisition. Another one we're going to talk about in a moment is the Salmon River Road Parallel Pathway. So I guess I need to push the slide button so you can actually see that slide. And I should note, all the images you're seeing are pictures from the Shuswap based on these active transportation conversations and projects that are underway. This slide, we're not going to go into it in detail, but it's just to show you in a quick snapshot that we're not messing around. All of those red lines are the major rural roads within the community, including the large yellow or green lines being the 97 and Highway 1 highways. And along that, all of those little arrows that you're seeing are 15 active transportation projects, at least in the desire stage, all of them at some point currently in the fairly aggressive trying to make them happen stage, some of them actually getting somewhere. There's 17 plans in place now. There's 4 First Nations priorities, and those dotted circles you're seeing, each one of those is a similar setup to the one that Anita spoke about, where we've got an archaic colonial design flaw, one might call it racist, unjust design setup, where communities have been built side by side with no connectivity. And the only way for people in one community to access food, clothing, shelter, the basics, is to walk along the edge of a highway, or in the case of Salmon Arm, the railway. And I think we're up to about 50 people in terms of fatalities. So the Secwepemc First Nations have been working on this much longer, in a much more overt way than the rest of the communities for much, much longer. So with all of that, there's also this other layer of a recognition that, wait a minute, if we do this well, it actually creates a whole new economic opportunity for the region as well. So Shuswap tourism and the tourism strategy is also inextricably linked with this whole conversation. So the conversations before lunch about other supporting initiatives that actually match what is happening here is totally in the wheelhouse for us. We get it. So what are the challenges? The challenges look like this. In terms of the physical environment, we've got narrow road widths, and it's already been built out. And so the road prism is slap in the middle of that road width, and there's no room for any separation. So there's hill grades, and they're often considered too steep. We've even been told that snow is a problem. And so maybe it is. Road right-of-ways vary along the corridors. There's fast-moving vehicles, including commercial vehicles. Nothing is complete. It's not compact, so there's always this forced connectivity that Anita talked about. And there's a tension between the need to move traffic through and within town and keep the traffic moving quickly on a national economic agenda with the local community's need for people to stop and be present and stay in those towns. And so there is a conflict economically that translates into a tension between how traffic is facilitated and designed for in terms of how fast or slow it moves. There's also a perception of safety, and that perception is that these roads are dangerous, so you just don't walk them. In terms of resource allocation, often the rural active transportation or safety conversation is considered a low priority, so few resources go to it. The parallel walking, cycling paths are perceived as expensive rural retrofits, and the ongoing maintenance comes up. Who's going to look after these things? Who's responsible for them? From a network planning point of view, from a transportation network planning point of view, one of the things we see is that planning of major road improvements typically occurs community by community. And we're seeing it right now down the Trans-Canada. Major push to twin all the way to the Alberta border. Within the Shuswap, that means there's conversations happening with each of those 4 Secwepemc bands. There's conversations happening with 1, 2, 3 municipalities and with 3 regional districts. And each of those conversations is happening separately. In the Salmon Arm Bay area, that amounts to 4 planning conversations with 4 different jurisdictional governments, and none of those, and they all connect. The design will connect, but none of those planning conversations are happening at the same time. Meanwhile, locally, everyone's going, wait a minute, we need to be working together. But Ministry of Transport's approach has been to work design by design. So it's there's an issue there. And the other piece we've already outlined for you is it's a reconciliation issue. We have a flawed, unjust design system. We've designed for fatalities, and we've separated communities, and we're saying in order to get to what you need to get to, you're going to have to walk along a railway or a roadway, and it's not okay. So, so on the design side, then we go, well, let's change it, and meeting design road standards is a challenge, particularly in the rural area where we're under the jurisdiction of commuter MOTI regulations. So road design standards favor wide lanes for traffic flow. Road right-of-way widths vary, and then there's a whole issue of liability concerns. So as soon as we start to talk about evidence, which says let's slow traffic down, let's change the road width standards, let's actually use design to affect change, liability often comes up as the first showstopper. And so what we get instead is large yellow signs that say share the road and have pictures of everybody on the road. And what's interesting is everyone locally at a rural level knows that they're being invited to get killed, because that's what's happening. We go on the road, and even if it's perceived risk, when you're out there with your toddlers and the trucks are going by really fast, you get it that you're at risk, and so you don't. All right. So a couple of little snapshots just so you kind of put this in some perspective. 2 case studies. And so part of this story is that we are seeing change. And I don't want to be kind of ranking on MOTI, but in the rural world, that's the partnerships, because there has been a change. So 15, 20 years ago, this is the Blind Bay community. Some of you may know it. Many people visit it in the summer. It's got the highest population concentration in the Shuswap outside of Salmon Arm. Plus, it's a popular summer tourist destination, and the population can double and triple in a 2-month period. So even though there's maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people here year-round, there can be 5,000 to 10,000 people here at certain peak times. It's concentrated along the lakefront road that doubles as a primary pedestrian, bicycle, and recreational tourist corridor. And the community has been rallying for years for a separated parallel pathway, but couldn't quite get the separation. There wasn't the room width. So the suggestion was, well, what if we narrow lanes and actually put a separated parallel pathway on one side of the road? It didn't, or it doesn't fit the MOTI standards. And so what they were able to come to was a compromise that put 1.5 meters on each side of the road and painted yellow lines. At the time, a number of us were going, we're doing the research, we're pulling it. We think we're seeing the engineering research say that if we do that, we're actually going to inspire drivers to drive faster because we're widening the actual road width. Well, this was a compromise that we could come up with, and so that's what they proceeded with. The regional district actually helped to finance it through taxation, so the local community actually helped to pay for it. The net result was instant and widespread. People started complaining to the regional director that it was feeling more and more dangerous because, you know what? People were driving faster because it felt safer, and there were yellow lines, and we knew where we had to be so we could go faster, and we knew where the people were walking. Cars are driving faster than they've ever driven on that road since these new retrofits. So it was a fail. but it was kind of a win. So that was 15 years ago. Let's go forward. This is this year. So every single road is the local communities have prioritized and said, we would like some kind of safer way to walk amongst places. In Silver Creek, this is along the Salmon River Road. This is the latest attempt by the regional district to figure out a way to do separation. It's a concentrated rural hub. There's a store, a gas station, community hall, school, even a library, a regional park about 2 kilometers down the road that doubles as playground, sports field, equestrian area, access to recreational trails. The school, young folks commute within the local rural area. They don't actually take a bus. They actually walk twice a day on the road. Or if they want to walk, they have to go on the road. And it's also one of the most popular destination cycling circuits in the region recreationally. There's a bridge across the river. It's narrow. It doesn't allow for pedestrian or bicycles. It narrows, and it's basically you're walking into the tight traffic crossing. But this time, when the conversation occurred, there was a strong push again through the regional district, led off on this. And with the new active transportation mandate that Ministry of Transport is working with, there's a different conversation. So the need for separation there was more appetite to consider it. And the history of the Blind Bay situation was also put on the table. It didn't work. After pointing out, however, the MOTI standards of separation still don't fit within this right-of-way width because of the placement of the road. But after pointing out and having a conversation about, wait a minute, so if we can't fit the 3-meter separation requirements, and if we don't compromise, it means we're still saying that young folks walking to that school are safer walking on the road. There was a negotiation and some compromise come up with, and we're not sure if it's going to be super successful, but it's better than it was before. They have got approval to do a separated pathway right down as far over as possible against Famous Line in the swale. So we're not sure what that's going to look like, but Ministry of Transport was willing to sign off on the engineering. They've done lots of kind of looking at it, and we've been able to get Bike BC funding to support that. So they've been able to leverage the funding. And the new provincial structure for infrastructure funding has suddenly made it possible for rural communities to actually even entertain this kind of project. So we'll see what happens. Ultimately, however, what needs to be noted is the compromise is still on the side of pedestrian safety. The vehicles are still being accommodated in terms of the average speed. And the previous slide, when you're going through that mixed area, I think they reduced the speed down to 60 kilometers an hour. So that's the 2 scenarios, and we're taking hope in this scenario. I think it's fair to say that we would dream that possibly there's a new 3rd case study coming where there's compromise on both sides. So it brings us back to the question for action. And Anita, I'm going to turn it back to you to bring us home here.
Okay. Great, thanks so much. So back to the question for action. How might we better support comprehensive solutions for safe active transportation development in rural and small communities? So what's needed? And I'm going to run through this list fairly quickly, and then hopefully we'll have more time for questions at the end. So from a healthy public policy perspective, provincial and regional active transportation strategies would be fantastic. Make safe active transportation primary planning and infrastructure goals in all communities. Integrate rural transit within active transportation plans. From an interagency and sectoral partnership and collaboration perspective, increase Indigenous cultural competency. The Secwepemc leadership and the communities in our region are very important in the work that we do and part of our work together. So that's really important. Understand communities' needs and approaches with suggestions when planning new or improved side roadways. Best solutions come when experts work collaboratively with those who know the local context. So when you're doing planning, strive for more than just consult and involve. Strive for collaboration. And include your health authority. There's quite a few of us in the room here today. And then what's needed in small rural communities, continuing here, this is capacity building. So we need to increase the perception of resources and capacity that small communities do have the ability to do this. It's not, don't be overwhelmed. Small communities can also do it. Professional development of elected officials and staff of active transportation planning and design and implementation. Provide support which is proportional to the need. So understand that local context. It's a community equity kind of idea. Resources, research, action guides, and toolkits that are based on small and rural communities. A lot of the research is on urban centers, especially from a population health perspective. A lot of the research, smaller communities, the privacy issue that we were talking about earlier this morning, that comes up and limits the data. So having research specific to small communities is really important. Funding opportunities for facility improvements, also proportional to the need. And then from engineering standards, policy, design standards, and the perceived liability risk, and also being innovative with right-of-ways, road widths, etc. Try to think about the local context and see how things can be fixed, be innovative. And also the necessity for inter-community transportation. So think about not just one community at a time or one section of road at a time. How does those roads, how does that network connect with all the networks either in that community or through the region? How are people moving through the entire, where they need to go on their day-to-day, weekly or monthly basis, right? Okay. So here's our vision and objective that we were going to work together with our partners. And so this photo is not in the Shuswap, but we dream of a nice separated pathway like that. But it's more about having the appropriate solutions that match the need. This is an expensive fit, and it might not be the right fit in every situation. So it's more about finding the appropriate solution for the whatever need is needed. Okay, and this comes to our last slide. We just wanted to acknowledge one of our very strong partners is Louis Thomas. He's a Secwepemc Knowledge Keeper and Nisconluth counselor, and also our partner in a lot of this work. And Louis always approaches life, and he always says, I'm willing to work with you if you're willing to work with me. And I just thought that would be a nice way to end. So are you ready to work collaboratively? And Kukshjem, that's how you say thank you in Secwepemc. And I'd just like to say too, we've left our contact information, so anyone is more than welcome to contact us at any time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Megan, do we have 5 minutes for questions? Okay. So we have 5 minutes for questions. If anybody has one of these people, very interesting presentation, and you know, so different than working in an urban environment. I'm sure there are so many benefits in working out there that you didn't talk about, but I'm sure there are. And but it was a very comprehensive and nice out-of-the-box thinking going on, and that's great. Anybody got a question? Oh, comment.
I think we're good. We're
Do I
good.
have to do this every time?
Oh,
So thanks for your presentation. Unfortunately, I missed the first part of it, but I'm sure the first part was just as good as the part that I caught, which I was very impressed. I'm really glad to hear from the people in rural areas, because we so rarely do here in the Big Smoke, and I really appreciate what you have to say. And I don't know whether you mentioned it earlier on, but I know that you know, a lot of our small Indigenous communities represent the highest mode share for active transportation in British Columbia, according to the last federal census. So this is very incredibly important work that you folks are doing. My one concern is, I've seen some of the results of side paths for cyclists and pedestrians, not on the Shuswap, but on the coast. The Tofino Ucluelet area and Hornby Island are two examples. And the results haven't been very successful, because the grades, the surface quality, the directness are all inferior to that available on the highway. And so as a result, some people do use the path, especially those people who have children with them, but others use the highway because, of course, regardless of the mode, we all want to get to where we're going quickly and efficiently. So I'm putting that out to you as a sort of a caution, but also perhaps something you could respond to, because that slide you showed that aspirational slide you showed looked wonderful, but frankly, what I've seen in BC thus far doesn't come close to that.
Can I respond?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's essentially exactly, I think it's on actually. So that's essentially what I was sort of tiptoeing around with that case study number 2. We're pleased that there was compromise and that there's a conversation about separation along that Silver Creek Road example, but it really is a compromise, and we're not. It's important, and it's a good next step, and so we're excited about that. But the concern is that it doesn't completely solve the problem. It actually takes a little bit of a step towards it. It probably will create a parallel pathway that gets primarily used in the summer, non-winter months. Snow plowing will still plow snow on top of it, and so it won't be usable in the winter anyways. But it does start some separation and allows the kids to be able to walk from the local homes to the school. So it's getting them off the roadbed. Does it create a separated bicyclable route like the picture implied that's actually usable? Our hunch is for a road cyclist, it won't. The road cyclist will still prefer the use of the road width. So it doesn't quite resolve the complete need, which is in essence similar to what you're saying, which is the result hasn't gone as far as it needed to go. But we don't want to say, oh, no, that's not a good solution, because for us to find a solution that's a compromise or that's moving along that trajectory to something that's more innovative, that's more responsive, from 15 years ago, is actually pretty substantial. Like we've seen Ministry of Transport along the highway coming back with designs with separated 10-foot wide, fully engineered active transportation specs that match the current standards within the TAC standards. So that's a big step forward. That used to be that no, it had to be 3 meters on the highway, and that was all that would be allowed. So with your caution well taken, sort of trying to keep the glass half full and say we've got further to go, but there's definitely been movement. Is that reasonable?
Sounds good. Oh, okay, we'll have this last one question.
I just wanted to say, I'm the person who's going to say a comment, but I really appreciated your value to reconciliation, because I think in the urban context, we are also concerned about the disproportionate impacts of enforcement on low-income and vulnerable communities. And we don't really have a great term for that. And I think that we have a lot to learn from your work in terms of gaining trust of people who have should not trust the government for empirical reasons. And I think that would be a really interesting story to itself that is a really great applicable story for us who are still working in urban areas in a different context for the same problem.
Good point. Good point. Okay, well,
I'd
like to thank you all.
Yes,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anita and Phil. That was great. I'd now like to welcome our next panel here to discuss safe school programs. So Brian Haney, transportation planner from the City of Surrey, Kristen Teedy, the team lead of Traffic Operations Group for the City of Surrey, Beth Herford, community transportation consultant and school travel planning program facilitator at Urban Systems, and Liliana Quintero, transportation engineer for the City of Vancouver. And the session will be moderated by Raheem Dilger, the president of TransSafe Consulting. I think we might need another chair. I shall find one.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm fighting a cold, so bear with me. I'm winning right now, but it's still early. So yes, we move from the rural environment to the school environment. Very different. Each of these environments is important because if we're serious about getting to zero, we need to successfully tackle each one. So like each of the other areas, there's opportunities and there's challenges in the school environment. Among the challenges are being able to, effectively work well, between municipalities, the road agencies, and the school districts, because that's sort of where the customers are, and they have the property that sometimes changes need to be made to. So and another challenge is sometimes, no matter what you try to do, in infrastructure changes, et cetera, there's some parents that will always want to drive their kids to school for security reasons. So maybe that always needs to be part of the discussion. Also, climatic conditions, I think, play a role in limiting the mode shift that can be achieved. But among the opportunities that we have to keep in mind are the fact that these are probably our most vulnerable, or among the most vulnerable users of our roads. Not only are many students the walkers and cyclists, but of course their children, which makes them even more vulnerable. And it says a lot of us as a society that about what we are as a society, about how well we take care of our most vulnerable and our children. So and the other, I think, key thing to keep in mind is that these types of programs that you're going to hear about today are really built to help create a safety consciousness among the youth, so that, these Vision Zero plans that, maybe we're looking at, maybe decades from now, hopefully they'll grow up with that consciousness and be the leaders of tomorrow, and they'll be, maybe they'll cycle and walk later if they do early in life, and they'll be some of the proponents of road safety. So without further ado, we have, I think, 3 presentations and 4 speakers. So our first presentation is made by 2 speakers, Brian Haney and Kristen Teed from the city of Surrey. So I don't know what order, but please come on up.
Slide. Brian and I will be speaking about Surrey's work and experiences with improving road safety in Surrey. Our Safe and Active Schools program was created with one overarching goal: to create a safe and comfortable environment for children and teenagers to walk or cycle to school. I'm going to need some help. Green? Ha. But in achieving our major goal, the program is able to contribute towards many other city and transportation objectives beyond simply reducing traffic congestion around schools. Other goals include improving public health, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution, increasing a sense of community, and most relevant for today, improving road safety for the entire school community. We're hoping to develop lifelong habits for the children as they grow, and to influence parents through their children. We began our Safe and Active Schools program 10 years ago as one of the early actions out of our transportation strategic plan. The Safe and Active Schools helped tick off a number of boxes from the plan. One, we had an increased desire to encourage modal shift. Secondly, it was natural that our first significant foray from just building transportation infrastructure and into education was at schools. Student safety and traffic congestion was an ever-increasing public concern, and this was also an opportunity to proactively engage the community. Safe and Active Schools is an umbrella term that we use for a number of different programs and initiatives. There's 2 main streams, as you can see: the safe side, which we use to refer to the engineering infrastructure side, and then the active stream, which is more of education and awareness. It's really turned into a brand name that we apply to all school transportation initiatives and work that we do, and that really helps elevate the status of individual initiatives as we write them into city plans and reports. An interesting thing about our program was new funding was not set aside for the program. Rather, we made changes to sort of how we do our business on a day-to-day basis, and reprioritized existing programs and reallocated funds. So on the safe side of things, being engineers, we naturally began the program with a study. We hired an engineering consultant to review traffic safety and operations on school property and the road frontages at all elementary, secondary, and private schools in Surrey. And the reports suggested short, medium, and long-term options for consideration. The timeframes, the major factors on determining them were the safety impact and the cost of the options. Once we finished the reviews, we began implementation. Between the projects from the reviews and everything else that's come up since then, we've done 850 projects and spent almost $28 million. Again, this was achieved through reprioritization of capital projects and fundings and reprioritization of staff time. Our projects have had three main focus areas: addressing traffic speed, on-street parking, and pedestrians. And I'm going to briefly discuss how we've tackled each of these through the program. Prior to starting the program, we'd had a pretty robust traffic calming or speed hump program, but with the advent of Safe and Active Schools in 2009, we changed our policy to streamline the evaluation process in school zones and sort of remove some of the red tape. Another change we made at that time, a policy change, was to allow traffic calming on collector roads in school zones. Collector roads as well as local roads, and that involved a lot of work with Coast Mountain Bus Company, TransLink, and the emergency services to ensure that everyone was on board with these changes. We also began proactively building traffic calming in conjunction with new school construction. In the 2017-18 school year, we began a pilot program to try out various methods of reducing speeds on arterial roads where we can't install vertical traffic calming devices or speed humps. And we're hoping to find something that has a long-term effect on reducing traffic speeds, as opposed to something that just sort of has a novelty effect that wears off. We're trying a variety of different methods, including flashing lights on school zone signs, decreasing the hours. The 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit is in effect to try to get increased buy-in from motorists, speed reader boards, and a couple of different types of pavement markings. The early results are various, but mostly encouraging. We've had most locations have reductions of 5 to 10 kilometers an hour that have been maintained a year later. So in general, we're pretty pleased. There's two aspects to road safety and on-street parking. One is ensuring you've got the appropriate restrictions in place, and then secondly, achieving compliance with them, which is absolutely the most challenging part of it. As you can see from the pictures, a really big safety concern is with children jaywalking to cars parked on the opposite side of the road from the school, especially if the kids are walking out from between parked cars and magically appearing in the road. Our typical approach is to install no stopping during school hour signs on the opposite side of the road. And our challenge is ensuring that parents understand the difference between no parking and no stopping. And in particular, that no stopping means not even for 30 seconds, and that safety does indeed trump convenience. So in 2017, we started creating color-coded parking maps for schools that clearly outline what the parking restrictions are and what the signs mean. And we've completed maps for about 60% of our elementary schools to date. And they certainly help improve the dialogue with the school community. A pedestrian network typically consists of sidewalks and road crossings. Although we've certainly built many school sidewalks, we've chosen to focus primarily on the conflict points between motorists and pedestrians. Besides simply installing and upgrading crosswalks, we've constructed a great deal of curb bulges that improve the visibility of and for pedestrians, prevent parking in places where it's not allowed, and to prevent passing. In the last year, we started trying plastic curb and delineators instead of just concrete curb. You can kind of tell in the photo, I think. On the right-hand side of the crosswalk, the solid white line is the plastic curb. And if you look close, you might be able to see some shadows of the delineator posts on the curb. The plastic curb is a whole lot cheaper and quicker to install. We're a little nervous about the longevity, durability, maintenance, and aesthetics over time. But this is a way that we're able to make interim improvements now while waiting for funding availability for permanent works. And so we're cautiously optimistic with this. Now I'm going to hand this over to Brian to talk about the active side of the program.
Thanks, Kristen. I've got a head cold and I can't hear myself talk. So if I'm screaming, just let me know. And I brought my water up here, so I may have a Marco Rubio moment for all you fellow Americans. Canadians probably won't get that. But so to complement the engineering side, we have three main outreach and education programs that I'd like to share with you. Our school travel planning program, our bike education program, as well as our walk and roll to school week. So I'm not going to dive too much into our school travel planning program today. Beth's going to be presenting on that with a little bit more detail coming up. But I would like to mention a couple of the main objectives, which is to improve road safety, understand what barriers and safety concerns impact travel choice, as well as celebrate active transportation. And so we do this by working with 5 schools per year on an 18-month cycle, with new schools joining the program every September. So we have 100 elementary schools in the city of Surrey, which is quite a bit. And to date, we've done 37 school travel plans. So I think we've done a pretty good job so far. The second main program that I want to discuss is our bike education program. This program began in 2013, and it targets all grade 4 and 5 students citywide. And we do this by enrolling 50 schools every single year and then repeating that cycle every second year. And so it's comprised of 2 sessions. One in-class session, which goes over basic rules of the road, cycling safety, as well as the proper use of personal protection equipment. And then we transition into outside on-bike training, where the students can start practicing those skills in simulated scenarios such as 4-way stops, roundabouts, etc. So recently we've began an evaluation component to our program, to where we will survey grade 4 and 5 students and parents, as well as grade 6 and 7 students and parents who had previously taken this course. And this is to see if we're having any sort of impact or if there's any sort of continuity in or the retainment of skills and knowledge. And so the third program and the final program that I want to discuss today is our annual Walk and Roll to School Week. And we set aside a week every October to celebrate active school travel. And this takes the form of a friendly competition to see which schools can get the highest percentage of students using active travel to and from school. But it also provides us many other benefits as well. It gives us an opportunity to give schools material to promote safe walking and cycling. And we also set aside a couple of events during this week to either do walking school buses or meet and greets at the pickup and drop off areas. And this allows us to be able to talk with not only school administration, but parents as well, to see what sort of unique safety situations or concerns they may have in their school community. So not only do these programs get kids walking and biking to school, but they help them realize that walking and cycling are viable forms of everyday transportation. And furthermore, we give them the tools to do so in a safe manner. And it's not all about the kids either. These programs can influence behavior parents as well. So who's involved? Strong partnerships with our stakeholders are key to successful programs. As you see, we've got quite a few stakeholders that are involved here, but I would just like to give the school district as one small example, and I'll briefly kind of describe that. So we have quite a bit of programs, and as it's understandable, schools are extremely stressed. Everybody knows that. It's definitely happening here in Surrey. Just too much programming, not enough staff time, too many students in the schools. And so we've had a really hard time getting schools to enroll in these programs. And largely that was because we were contacting the schools individually. And we really weren't having too much success. So more recently, what we've been doing is we've actually been going to the school district and working with them and using them as a conduit as our call of action for action. And since then, we've had, if not nearly full enrollment in all of our programs. So just that close partnership has really influenced the success of our programs. And the other thing I want to mention is that a lot of these other stakeholders, such as RCMP, ICBC, as well as TransLink, have their own school safety programs. And being able to collaborate with them really strengthens our own program, but more importantly, it allows our municipal budget to go quite a bit further. So measuring the impact of our Safe and Active Schools programs. As you can imagine, it can be really hard to quantify the safety outcomes of these education programs. However, through surveys, feedback, and anecdotal stories, we know that we're increasing awareness of road safety around schools. And they're also productive because these programs provide a channel of communication between the school community and the city, and vice versa, where it's a way for us to disseminate our school safety message and our road safety message. And my pages are stuck together. There we go. And the last thing I want to say is a culture of safety and modal shift doesn't happen overnight. From our experience, multi-year programs provide the necessary continuity for the school community to embrace safe and active school travel. Thank you.
So we'll have questions after, time permitting. But as Brian mentioned, the next talk will be given by Beth Herford of Urban Systems about school travel planning. Beth.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I'm here. I'm going to give you a general kind of quick overview of what school travel planning is. We've heard quite a bit about kind of the implementation and the programmatic portions of school travel planning, which certainly fit within kind of the umbrella of school travel planning. But I think it's an important message to know that it's not prescriptive. The programs can be designed in ways to meet any community's needs, and they're all very unique, as are each of the schools within each of the communities. So we kind of work to make sure that the programs are kind of addressing what the community needs are as they approach us for school travel plans. So, by definition here, we have several definitions that we use when we're talking about school travel planning, but basically school travel planning is encouraging students to travel by active means. And in order to do so, we need to ensure that we really understand their perspectives. So kind of 5 goals we've identified, and I mean, there are several others, but these are the main goals we hear over and over, would be to improve student safety, including the traffic safety, of course, around schools. And not only in the immediate vicinity of the school, but on the routes to school, and keeping in mind catchment sizes vary. Increasing trips made by walking, cycling, and transit, mostly focusing there on the walking and cycling. Decreasing traffic congestion in front of schools, also directly related to traffic safety in the immediate vicinity of the school. Increasing physical activity levels, and decreasing GHG emissions. So I'm going to speak a bit more about engagement, engaging the vulnerable populations. We, shown here is kind of the typical, what I would call typical school travel planning process. And, the first step being assessing the situation. In order to ensure we understand all the characteristics of of each specific school, we gather that information through several means. We meet with the school administration, the parent advisory councils, leadership, students, to kind of kick off each of the school travel planning processes. In addition to that, we do site visits at pickup and drop-off times, and often during evenings to understand lighting situations. We also put out family surveys. We survey families to understand what their main concerns are. And we also want to understand what, for parents that are allowing their kids to walk in school, what are the biggest benefits? Kristen and Brian showed a few of the results of those surveys in their presentations as well. We also do student visioning. We have the students come up with their own vision of what school travel planning means. And you would think that these vision statements are consistent across all schools, but they each have their own characteristics. And students actually, it takes a little while to get into this, but it ends up being a really neat exercise to understand all their different perspectives. And then in addition, we put together walkabouts with each school. The walkabout team's made up of a variety of stakeholders. Fairly consistently, we have students joining us, parents, school administration, the program facilitators, and staff from the city of Surrey or whichever community it is that we're working in. So that provides us the information to kind of start to understand those critical needs and then come up with those solutions. So through that process, we have understood the current state of school travel planning at each school and then determined the school's goals and visions. And then we move into kind of identifying and implementing action items. And that's where we really consider those results of the walkabouts and the site visits and make kind of informed engineering recommendations for consideration of the city that we're working with in order to ensure implementation. And then tracking progress. And also, as Kristen mentioned, enforcement being key. Many of the recommendations we end up making, of course, are related to enforcement. So as far as education and engagement, I can't highlight enough how important it is to hear the students' perspectives. Understanding the perspectives of the most vulnerable road users is really critical for a successful school travel planning process. We provide tools to the schools for the following school year if we're kind of fitting within the typical school travel planning timeline. So ensuring that they've got maps that outline the best routes to school. And also we ensure that there's opportunity to celebrate each school's kind of commitment to active transportation. So typically these fall within in the spring months to kind of get everybody enthusiastic once the weather turns. And they can be school-wide events, but they all depend on the level of commitment from the school administration. But we always make sure to celebrate each school's kind of commitment to the school travel planning process. This year in Surrey, we'll be running the celebration program throughout the Bike to School week. So there are many, many lessons, and I'd be happy to speak with anybody who's interested to know more. But the largest being that we need to engage the students in a really meaningful way. Their perspective is just very, very valuable. One approach will not fit all schools or all communities, so you need to be adaptable to each of them. And some, I should also highlight, some schools are more interested in the education and engagement portion. Others are much more interested in the engineering recommendations. This is more than just an action plan. We're improving safety for students. It requires resources, both for actual implementation, for infrastructure changes, but also for the longevity of the programs. Engineering recommendations help support the implementation, which is something that we provide. And then long-term success requires ongoing support from schools. And as we've heard, I think most people probably know, the school administration are under a lot of stress and have some capacity issues. And then for the legacy of the programs, there's a potential to create a solid foundation for a healthy life. It's a really important part of this as well. And then changing child behavior takes time, no surprises there, and that partnerships are really key. Of course, many others I'm happy to discuss. So that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And our final speaker in this panel is Liliana Quintero from the City of Vancouver to talk about their school travel planning program. Liliana.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank the City of Surrey for inviting the City of Vancouver to present today, and thanks for organizing this great event. And I'm going to talk again about school active travel planning program. So slides will be a bit similar to the other presenters. But so our school active travel program, it's about consulting with the school community and the school, our school partners to identify school travel challenges and how to tackle them. Our key partners are, of course, the Vancouver School Board, the Vancouver Police, and Parking Enforcement. And the goal of our program is to make walking, cycling, and rolling more comfortable and safe for traveling to school, as well as to increase awareness and encourage active travel. Here are some metrics of our program. So in Vancouver, we have a total of 180 schools, including elementaries and high schools, and around 70,000 students are enrolled in these schools, and they try to get to their schools every day. Our program tackles 4 to 6 schools per year. And at this time, we have done programs for 31 schools at different stages in the program. Usually when a school is part of our program, it takes us about 2 to 3 years to finalize all the infrastructure upgrades and all of the educational portion. Another thing to highlight, in Vancouver, around 200 kids are injured annually. This is the information from the BC ambulance data. So this only covers the ones that were transported by ambulance to a hospital. So there could be more, but similar to the presentation from San Francisco, we also have a lot of hospital data, and we try to find interesting trends to share and make it interesting. So this is the process of our school program, basically the different stages. The first stage for us is to evaluate the local context. So go to the school, identify what are the challenges, how in a school walkabout, do mode share surveys. The second phase is more on developing an action plan that tackles those specific issues. Phase 3 is implementation, and our last phase is follow-up. So we basically go back and see what items are missing, how we can accelerate those, and evaluate again and resurvey again the school community to see if things have changed. So this is a bit of an example of how we start our action plan. So pretty much it includes a school walkabout. We walk around with the parents and the school community so they can show us which intersections they have concerns with, what signage might be missing, any paint markings or anything else they want to highlight to us. We also do our own visits on our own time to see what the travel patterns are, what's happening, as well as we do a hands-up survey with the students, as well as a take-home survey to identify travel preferences at each school. So this is an example of a hands-up survey from students. This is Mount Pleasant Elementary. So you can see a 60% walking mode share. So we also highlight some things to celebrate. So this one is a very successful walking school. And then we can focus on that and see how we can help them excel at that. Another part of the survey, this is the more for the parents that take at home survey. So this is an example of one of the questions that we asked them. What I would allow to my child to walk to and from school more if. So usually we're trying to identify like what would help change those behaviors and what are parents' perspectives on this. We ask questions about cycling and also like why do you drive? Like what are your reasons to drive, to try to identify if there's anything we could change to change their perceptions, or maybe that they'll try another mode. And then after that, we gather all of that information and develop an action plan. So here are some of our considerations. So it's what the whole neighborhood wants with respect to the school, because there's one thing is what the school wants, but there's also like what the whole neighborhood wants. What are their needs? How does the school fits in with a travel network? We also try to find solutions on budget because we have limited budget, and how we can prioritize the infrastructure or the education alternatives that will maximize our benefits. Also solutions that are appropriate. And here's an example of some sort of our toolkit and the different solutions that we have and how much they cost and how much time they take. So usually we try to look at a set of different wide ranging options. Usually the low hanging fruit is the ones that we tackle first, which is like maybe adding more time for students to cross at the signal that's in front of a school. And there's an easy, simple one that we could do within a week, or adding any missing signage, adding countdown timers. So this is the little repaint all the paint markings that are faded, trim trees around the school so that your signage is visible. And then we go into the more larger or medium items like speed humps, raised crosswalks, traffic calming, to even flashing beacons as signals. So, and it depends on each school because it's tailored to each need. Some schools are missing a piece of sidewalk. Some schools are missing markings. Some schools have everything. For example, yeah, we've had schools that are next to a newly completed bikeway. So they don't really need anything. They need more of the education piece. So this is a sample of an action plan for LoRa Seeker. So basically, yeah, we highlight the infrastructure items that we can complete for that school, and we share that with the community as part of a full detailed report of the challenges that they mentioned and what we're doing to address them. But again, it depends on each school. And then besides infrastructure, we also have the education and encouragement piece as well. So we have our partners from the Vancouver Police conduct pedestrian safety talks to kind of train our kids to understand the rules of the road and get to walking independently at some point. So getting that knowledge. Our partners at TransLink at Travel Smart, they hold a Transit 101 workshop to, again, teach the older elementary kids how to take transit to school. We do cycling education, also artistic signage. So that's giving the kids a chance to do a sign of something that's related to traveling to school. And then we make it at our sign shop where we make our road signs, and then they can hang it at the school. So that one on the left, it was a signal that's on recall. So it means that the pedestrian phase goes on every time. So they don't need to get out of the school to wait for the signal to go because it's a truck route. So it's a little bit of not a great place for a school. So the kids created that sign that says, that you don't need to press the button, that the button's always on. So it's another way to explain that message, and they hang the sign on the school, and it's out there for everybody to know. We also have a mural program where they can close the city provides the funds to do mural, and they can close the street and paint it and do some tactical urbanism to make their street more fun. And these are new education and encouragement pieces that we're doing more recently. As my colleague Lacey Hurdle mentioned, we hired a child musician, Will Strout, to develop a song about seniors and children and safety. It's called Grandma on the Move, but it's to highlight that awareness and that empathy piece of like, look at my grandma crossing on the road, be careful, pay attention. So we'll release that in March, and we're also buying the right of his previous traffic-related songs, which are Walk and Roll, which is about pedestrian safety, Bike Safety Boogie, which is about bike safety, and Boost Me Up, which is about child seats. And we're also developing a coloring book and giving concerts at the school. So that should be fun this summer. We're also launching a youth skateboarding education for high school students to promote that rolling piece. And we've developed a mini grant pilot for the parents and the school community to take on their own to do like a small encouragement and promotion activity, maybe related to bike to school week or to walk and wheel to school month. And then again, similar to City of Surrey, yeah, we also provide parents with resources to do where is it appropriate to pick up and drop off your kids, where can you park, where can you not park, what the signage means, because that seems to be an issue. And we also provide an infrastructure map so people know where the bike routes are, the transit stations, the signals. In the past, we used to do best routes as well, but we found that sometimes because the routes were static and on a paper, sometimes it wouldn't really apply to everyone. So everybody didn't find the routes relevant. So right now we're just showing the infrastructure. And then again, we go back and we follow up and try to see how we did. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Liliana, and thank you to all the speakers. I've been advised that there's no time for questions, but you can mingle with them the next break or the reception at 5 o'clock, right? Okay, great. If you have any questions or want to chat with any of them. So just in conclusion, again, thank you. I think there's some great programs out there, and it seems like there's some successes in addressing safety around our schools. I hope that it's all being, with all the number of schools that Vancouver and Surrey are looking at, that the learnings are being consolidated, and then that the information is feeding into how we site and plan our schools in the future, so that less of those safety issues are there. So with that, just thanks again, and on to the next session.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I now have the honor of welcoming to the stage Dr. Tarek Syed, professor and distinguished university scholar at the University of British Columbia and Canada's first ever Transportation Safety and Advanced Mobility Research Chair. Today, he will be presenting on proactive road safety management. Dr. Syed is a fellow of the Engineering Institute of Canada, the Canadian Academy of Engineering, and the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering. His research has addressed a wide spectrum of transportation system applications with a focus on traffic operation and safety and intelligent transportation systems. With an outstanding track record in transportation engineering, Dr. Tarek Syed has received numerous honors and awards, including the Centennial Road Safety Award from the Transportation Association of Canada, one of only 3 ever recipients. This award celebrates the progress in the field of road safety over the past 100 years in Canada and recognizes Dr. Syed's outstanding transformational and long-term contributions to road safety. Welcome, Dr. Syed.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's still awake. So I'm going to talk about proactive road safety management. I'm going to start by providing a background. Some of the information in the background has already been discussed before, so I'm going to go through it quickly. I'm going to emphasize the challenges that we have, and then I'm going to go through some new trends in road safety analysis, where we're going, and I'm going to give example of some of the new work that's being done on proactive safety management examples. So we all agree of the importance of reducing the social and economic cost of road accidents. We have 1.35 million fatalities, and it is our product that has these fatalities. So we are responsible for a product that is associated with 1.35 million fatalities, and usually get away with it by blaming the road user. So we are creating a system, and we're saying the system is good, and it is a problem of the road user of the system, which is not true. We can make significant changes to the system to eliminate the majority of these collisions. But there is good news, especially in developed countries such as Canada. From 1970 to 2005, we've seen about 50% reduction in fatality rates, despite a significant increase in motorization. We've been doing a lot of research, and significant advances have been made in road safety analysis. And these developments, for the first time, are creating a movement towards explicit consideration of safety in planning, design, and management, which is different from the past, when we did not used to do that. We used to have an implicit evaluation of safety. However, it is not all good news. We have many challenges. And I'm going to list some of them. In my opinion, these 3 are major. The way our research and our effort in improving safety analysis techniques has focused mainly on the statistical techniques that we can use. We're trying to find associations all the time, and in many cases, we don't understand very well. Which brings me to the next point. Less attention has been devoted to improving our understanding of collision factors and how safety countermeasures actually work. We don't understand very well. And the last one, in my opinion, is the most important. And this is what our work at UBC has been trying to correct, is the reactive way we address safety. So we rely on collision data. Collisions are rare and random events. So we have to wait for a number of years before we identify problematic locations and to correct them, which is, in my opinion, fundamental ethical and practical issue. People need to die or severely injured before we intervene, identify a problem, and try to correct the problem. Continue with the challenges. Collision represent situations in which the road system has failed, yet our understanding of the failure mechanism is very poor. And this is a fact. We don't understand very well, which reduces the accuracy of diagnosis and the remedy process. And again, we are inflating many of our effectiveness of countermeasures. You look at these toolkits and all of that, and you see numbers like 80% reduction in this type of collisions if you introduce an LED signal, for example, which cannot be true. So if I have a signal, which is 20% reduction, and then another 80% reduction because of LED, am I eliminating most of my collisions? No, we need to be very careful when we apply the effectiveness values that are published in many documents that we are using today. The traffic safety field has been missing the rigorous and scientific approach to extract knowledge from the data that already exists. We have a lot of data, and it's going to become even much better with the new technologies, autonomous and connected vehicles. We will enter the era of big data. There will be a huge amount of data on individual drivers, individual maneuvers, individual evasive actions. We will know many, many things, and we're not ready for that. We need to upgrade our techniques, analysis techniques, so we can use this data. These challenges may make it difficult to achieve further safety advancement and may offer an explanation to the smaller reduction, and in many jurisdictions significant increase we're seeing, not only in Canada, but in Europe, where we are modeling our systems around, and in the US. We're starting to see increase in fatality rates and injury rates in many urban and rural. And I always like to point this second point. We now have about 1.35 million fatalities, which is 7% higher than the 1.2 million fatalities in 2010 when the UN Decade of Action was announced. So we're not doing very well. It is time to use more realistic, proactive safety analysis approaches, which will give us better understanding of road user behavior. If we're going to solve the problem, we need to understand the problem very well first. And if we don't, we're going to keep applying things that may not be very effective. So what are the new trends in road safety analysis techniques? In my opinion, that's my opinion, I'm listing here 6 of them. The good news is that we're now having explicit evaluation of safety impacts. So we can have safety analysis as a standalone component. We used to assume it is embedded in other analysis. We are quantifying, and this is very important, quantify, but quantify with the correct tools. Do not quantify with the 80% reduction and 90% reduction. Because in many cases, if it is too good to be true, it is false. We're moving away from rigid standards and warrants. There was an earlier presentation about highway design standards. We used to assume that following design standards or following traffic warrants mean that a road is safe or a design is safe, which is not true. Following standards, these are minimum standards, do not mean that a road is safe, do not mean that a road is unsafe, and more important, it doesn't mean that a road is as safe as it should be. So these are separate. Following standards and warrants does not guarantee safety. We're going proactive. We're not waiting for collisions to happen. We have proactive tools now that can quickly, very quickly, identify problems. And at the same time, we are developing safety and driver behavior. Maybe I should change driver to road user behavior modeling approaches. We are now capable with this as advancement in the AI techniques, artificial intelligence techniques, Two, we are creating tools that are extremely smart, and we can model the behavior very well. I'm going to give an example of some work we're doing later. And at the end, it's very important. We are entering a new era, smart mobility and big data. Especially with the big data is huge. We will be able to collect very detailed microscopic road user behavior data. And this can allow me to totally change the ways in which we do our safety analysis. So because of lack of time, I'm going to only focus on 2 of these 6 points. I'm going to give examples of proactive safety management approaches, some of the projects we've been doing. And I will also discuss how we are getting much better understanding of road user behavior, incorporating these in our safety analysis techniques. In general, if you look at the engineering approaches to road safety management, you can think of 2 different approaches. The reactive approach, which has been going for a long time, where we identify what we call black spots, based on accident history, and try to correct them. And the proactive approach, where we try to include safety very early at the planning and design stages, so we can design roads that will be problem-free. Engineering road safety strategies have often been reactions to existing problems identified by collision history. That's the reactive approach. The reactive program is very successful, especially when you start a new program, because you will have a road network full of black spots and problematic areas. We need to fix these. But after some time, you cannot stop there. You need to bring the whole safety level accident history and expected accidents down. And this will only happen through a proactive approach to road safety. So I'm going to give 2 examples because, again, we don't have much time. Proactive safety planning techniques. And I'm going to focus my presentation on the second part, which an example of using automated road safety analysis using near misses analysis. So that's an example of tools. We can develop models now that will go through a neighborhood and will identify problematic zones and safe zones. So on the left, the green one is safe zones for active transportation in Vancouver. On the right, you have what we call the black spot zones or hot zones. And I can, after that, look at the factors that are triggering the safety issue or the green issue. And based on that, I can come up with new designs. And this is based on actual data and actual collisions and near misses. The other one that we've been doing for the last 10, 12 years is the use of near misses or traffic conflicts. And the traditional approach is reactive based on collision data. Collisions are rare events. So whenever you want a statistically valid identification or diagnostics or before and after analysis, you need usually to wait 2-3 years before you can do anything. And this approach has ethical issues, as I said. Collision data is problematic, we know that. Long observation periods. And the last one is important. Collision data doesn't offer good understanding of the safety problems. The police record will not tell me much. You will always see that check mark on driving without due care in almost all collisions. Driver inattention is always marked. But we need better understanding than that. So at UBC, we started working with near misses. If you look at the safety pyramid, you have your accidents on the very top. This will be fatal injury, PDOs, property damage only collisions. And then under that, you have the near misses. So why restrict our analysis on the very top rare events, where the events that occur more frequently below this can give me much better understanding. And we decided to automate the process using computer vision techniques. So that's an example of downtown Vancouver analysis. You see this is in slow motion. You see that this van was about to hit this pedestrian. On the top left, it is the deceleration, -4 meters per second square deceleration to avoid hitting the pedestrian. You see indicators. The one bottom left is time to collision. They were about 1.5 seconds away from hitting each other. In green on the top right, you see the speed of the van that will leave the scene. And on the bottom right, you see the pedestrian speed profile, and you see the ambulation, which means that it's one step after another. And we can use that for classification. I can classify the type of road users with very high accuracy. It works very well. That's from some work we've done in Shanghai. And you can see that we can get a lot of information. You can see the cyclist. This yaw rate, which is the change in the horizontal angle, is a very good indicator of the safety issues at the location. And we can identify conflicts. We can identify how many conflicts. We can identify acceleration, deceleration, many very detailed microscopic data that will allow us much better understanding. This is some work we are doing. We have completed actually downtown New York City. And you see all the heat maps. These are all problematic areas. You see here you have the one between cyclists and vehicles. And on top, there was a taxi pickup area. And you can see where we have other issues as well. And this is also another good thing to study, ride hailing. We are introducing that, and the pickup and drop off will be a big issue for safety when we approve that. Again, you can see why you had this hot area at the right turn with the right turning vehicles. There are many of these. And the solutions are very easy. And again, I know that our solution will quickly eliminate the problem. That's downtown Vancouver. Again, that's from Surrey. And we can take collisions, and we can, I know the signal indication. I know whether the driver took an evasive action. I know whether he slammed the brakes or not through calculating the jerk. I know the deceleration rate. I can estimate whether a driver was paying attention or not. I can get very detailed microscopic data. So I'm going to go through these quickly in the interest of time, but you have many of them. And I can write one-page report for each collision. This can be very useful and helpful to the police or ICBC and others. Again, you can quickly tell what the problem is. And it can be fixed in a very effective way. Now, most of the work, the connected vehicles will give me their locations in real time. And many of the new vehicles now are in the market, are connected. I can get the locations. And these trajectories will allow me to, in real time, calculate collision probabilities and intervene if there is an issue. I can make changes to a signal. And this is a project we're doing with TransLink and ICBC, where we can intervene to minimize what we call shock waves, so the vehicles will not stop. And I can do many things with AI techniques. So this controller that we're developing is an AI controller. It recognizes all of these shock waves and heat maps and will take actions to minimize not only delay, which is the typical adaptive signal control, but also safety. So we can model safety in real time and improve it in real time. I can do the reactive approach much faster. This is the highest collision prone location, city of Edmonton. And again, they give us their data. We did analysis. That's few days of work instead of 3-4 years of collision data. And we make countermeasures. And these countermeasures are related to the behavior and related to the near misses. And since we implemented these, they didn't have a single collision after being the highest collision prone location in the city of Edmonton. This is some work we're doing City of Vancouver, evaluating LPI. I'm just showing this video because it's interesting, doesn't mean anything. But you can see an LPI, and in few days, we can get that this LPI reduced traffic conflict, pedestrian vehicle conflicts by 20%. Actually, we have tools now to convert this 20% to expected reduction in collisions, using what we call extreme value theory models. This is in California. This is Oakland, Chinatown, before and after scramble. And again, we can quickly do before and after We get our heat maps and conflicts where things are taking place, their severity, why they are taking place, and we can calculate effectiveness very quickly. And these are real effectiveness as opposed to many of the numbers that you see in the lecture that are inflated. We can collect very detailed microscopic data. So you can see that we can classify with very high accuracy. On the top right, you have a pedestrian, and you see the ambulation because of the steps. In the middle, you see a cyclist, which the signal, the speed profile, looks a little bit different. On the bottom, you have a vehicle, and it is like a smooth, straight movement. And I can do that for classification. So again, 3 data sets, 1 from UBC, the famous roundabout, and 2 from SERI. And again, we're achieving 85 to 96% correct classification rate of road user types without looking at the shape. And then in our other work, we add a shape component, and we can read these numbers to close to 100%. I can get very detailed microscopic behavior of pedestrians. This is downtown Vancouver. You can see the pedestrian at the bottom, which is the green trajectory. He's going to stop to talk to his companion. We see the drop in speed. I can model the movement. I can understand how they move. I can understand the steps. That's Hastings, Main and East Hastings. Main and Hastings, sorry, not East Hastings. And you can see the pedestrian speed, and you see the amount of pedestrians that are jaywalking, crossing at the middle. And they cross much faster, they run, compared to pedestrians on the crosswalk. As I said, we can take the signal and we can apply the same techniques like in communication signals, like phones, and I can get what we call the dominant frequency. And this frequency is basically the step frequency. And I can do many things with it. I can, in this case, I'm showing you how females and males I can classify based on the walking mechanism. We're not looking at shape, we're looking at the walking mechanism. We can identify distracted pedestrians. Actually, there is an article today in the Globe and Mail about this study, how we can, distracted pedestrians walk in a less stable pattern, and they stay much longer in the intersection. And from their walking stability, change in gait per time, and I can identify them very fast. And again, we achieved about 80%, which is not bad at all. This is the UBC roundabout. You see the cyclist speed. Cyclists who are taking the sidewalk are much slower than cyclists who are taking the regular lanes, and cyclists in the inside lane are faster than cyclists on the outside lane. You get a lot of behavior data. We can identify, collect data on whether a cyclist is wearing a helmet or not. So I can point to the head. I don't know how to go back. Okay. Oh. It's supposed to be about technology, and obviously I'm not very good at it. So. Okay, so I can point to the head, and from the shape of the head, I can identify whether a cyclist is wearing a helmet with about 85% accuracy. Again, I can model behavior. This is during the fireworks. And we developed our own simulation based on AI techniques. And I just show you trajectories of pedestrians moving in this area. And you can see one is simulated with our tool, and one is the real trajectory collected from the video data. And you can see that it works very well. I can model the individual walking behavior of a pedestrian. And this is a reason to do this work. For example, a vehicle entered the area, it's not allowed to. So this vehicle moved inside the area, and we wanted to model how these 6 pedestrians in green reacted to the vehicle. So we know the real trajectories, and I wanted to see whether I can model that or not. And this is what you get. Again, it's not identical, it will never be identical. But you can see that we can model, we can understand the behavior extremely well. And now we don't have to wait for a police record 1 page that doesn't say much. I can understand much better. This is existing work we're doing on the Brooklyn Bridge, New York City. And again, we're trying to model the interactions and try to improve safety on the Brooklyn Bridge. So in summary, despite the recent success, the future of road safety is somewhat uncertain. It's not really bad, but we need to start using our techniques to better understand and come up with more innovative solutions. There are many opportunities, the application of new concepts, Vision Zero, safe system approach, proactive safety, and they are all revolve around the same thing. Intervene early and do not wait for collisions to happen. New technologies, connected and autonomous vehicles, will bring a lot of benefits, but at the same time, and I know not everybody agrees with me, we don't understand their impact very well. We don't understand their impact very well. There are many issues that need to be resolved before we say they are improving safety significantly. Third one is very important. We're starting to collect huge amount of data. And this data is available. And there are many issues, privacy issues, cybersecurity issues, many issues. Who has access to this data? And we need to change our techniques so we can utilize this data efficiently. We need safety research to better prepare for the future. And the future, in my opinion, will be a total departure from what we're doing now. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Questions or time? Oh, okay.
I wish we had time for questions, but Tarek, hopefully you'll be staying after the break and for our cocktail hour later. Okay, thank you. That was just superb. I'd like to welcome to the stage now for our last panel of the day, for our discussion on speed and Vision Zero, my favorite panel of the day. Brian Patterson, Principal and Senior Transportation Planner with Urban Systems, Dr. Michael Schwant, Public Health Physician with the BC Centre for Disease Control, and we'll welcome back to the stage Mavis Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you. Another great presentation, Tarek, and there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about afterwards, so don't leave this place. So, the green one. In this session, we're going to talk about safe speeds and its relationship to Vision Zero. And if we are really serious about adopting Vision Zero as the ultimate road safety goal, then we must introduce safe system thinking if we're going to get there. A key component of this approach is safe speeds. Management of speeds is at the core of all road safety problems. And while some speed management interventions may be politically challenging to introduce, it is a challenge that must be urgently addressed. Speed is the single element of road safety with management that can drive down the number of deaths and serious injuries. This is because speed uniquely has the following features. I just said those things. So what we have here is, first of all, that speed increases both crash occurrence and crash severity. The laws of physics are apply universally, so it doesn't matter if you're in a small community, a large city, in a province, or across the country, or in any other international places. The benefits of speed reduction on deaths and injuries are well quantified by research, which allows us to predict the level of change in travel speeds required to deliver the road safety targets. Speed reductions provide strong benefits for all road users, but especially essential when targeting programs at vulnerable road users. Reduced speeds will provide synergistic benefits in other areas, such as fossil fuel usage and vehicle emissions, climate change and noise pollution. which already seem to be supported politically, and in some cases have become a funding priority. The benefits of speed management based on the Safe System approach can be evaluated and within limited budgets. Sorry, I'm going to go back. No, I'll leave it at that. I just want to show you this slide from Sweden, which talks about the various appropriate speeds for different types of roads. And it is in other documents, but I just find it very, very interesting to look at what speeds we should be having people travel at. So safe speeds can be managed through many mechanisms, including various aspects of road design and field vehicle technology, as well as through education and enforcement. Effective communications to increase government and community understanding of the relationship between travel speeds, crash risk, and injury levels will be of significant assistance as we move forward. In this session, we're going to have two presentations. One is focused on the management of speed and safe speeds in an urban environment, and the other one is looking at the issues of speed and speeding on rural roads. So I'm inviting, who's speaking first? Okay. Thank you, Mike. Brian.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to speak about the urban side of speed management and focusing specifically on the way we design our streets and really how that creates the communities we want to see. My background is mainly looking at active transportation planning and design, so I often approach this topic from the lens of vulnerable road users and recognizing that speed is really, really important when we're looking at comfort of walking and cycling. And so anything we can do to reduce speeds can help for overall road safety, but is really, really important to encourage active modes of transportation and improve safety for vulnerable road users. So I'll talk a little bit about urban speed management and focusing specifically again on how we can reduce speeds through street design. And I'll be talking specifically about looking mainly at residential streets or quiet streets and what we can do through creating neighborhood slow zones and looking at the experience in Europe and case studies in a number of cities across North America that have implemented neighborhood slow zones. So firstly, why speed matters. As Mavis mentioned, it's really part of the Safe Systems approach that we're talking about through this conference today as one of the 4 pillars of road safety, looking at safe speeds, safe roads, safe road users, and safe vehicles. And if we look at the contributing factors to collisions, or more importantly, contributing factors to serious injury crashes, it's really the opposite of those. Contributing factors are when we have unsafe vehicles, unsafe speeds, which I'll be speaking about, unsafe road conditions, or unsafe road users. And when we look at the impacts of speed, this graph will be familiar to most people in the room here. We're really looking at the physics, as was mentioned at the outset, and really looking at speed. There's 2 important factors, looking at the stopping distance of speeds where we have 50 kilometers an hour versus 30 kilometers an hour speeds. The stopping distance is twice as great when we have speed limits of 50 kilometers an hour compared to 30 kilometers an hour. So by reducing the speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour, we actually double that reaction time to help lessen the likelihood of a collision occurring. And then of course, looking at just physics itself, a greater force of collision. A vehicle that impacts a road user or pedestrian at 50 kilometers an hour has 2.25 times the force of impact compared to a vehicle traveling at 30 kilometers an hour. So when we look at those physics, we see that the likelihood of being involved in a serious injury or fatality is significantly increased when speeds are increased to 50 kilometers an hour. If a pedestrian were struck at 30 kilometers an hour, there's about a 10% likelihood of a fatality. That increases 8-fold to 80% when we have speeds of 50 kilometers an hour. But often when we're designing our streets, we see convenience or mobility is sometimes viewed as more important in many cases than the impact of collisions and particularly injuries and fatalities. And that's really a value proposition here. It's time versus safety, and it's something we need to be thinking about as we're designing our roads and designing our communities. And in fact, it's not even necessarily true on most residential streets, like I'll be talking about. Speeds are already, in most cases, likely below 50 kilometers an hour, and we can design our streets to really create those conditions. And when we look at collision data across British Columbia, we know that speeding is the #1 contributing factor to fatalities in British Columbia, and there's over 100 speeding-related fatalities in British Columbia each year. So it's an important issue. We need to right-size our streets. This is an example of a one-way street in the city of Calgary, which has been designed for throughput and for channelizing vehicle traffic into and out of the city's downtown core as fast as possible, and really not focusing on vulnerable road users. Although if you look closely in the far right lane, there is actually a cyclist in this picture, but not a very comfortable environment for cyclists, and really creates conditions that encourage speeding. So how do we right size our streets? Well, this is an example of a similar one-way street in Vancouver where lane reallocation was used and put in a bidirectional protected bike lane, which helps to reduce vehicle speeds, creates a more predictable road environment, and improves safety for vulnerable road users. So with that backdrop in mind, I'll focus a little bit more specifically on quiet streets and the examples and case studies of creating what are called neighborhood slow zones. And neighborhood slow zones are inspired by programs in the United Kingdom and elsewhere in Europe, and really are areas where we have an entire neighborhood or portion of a community where the default speed limit is set at typically at 30 kilometers per hour. These are typically relatively small, self-contained areas and have design features, things like signage and gateway treatments, which I'll show some examples of shortly, to help reduce vehicle speeds and really create an environment that's comfortable to be shared by all road users, people walking, cycling, and driving, and using some traffic calming and traffic diversion measures, which creates kind of a self-enforcing design that creates those slow speed conditions. This is often looked at or called the 20 is plenty movement in the UK, and lots of examples there as well. So some examples in the Netherlands, we look at residential streets in the Netherlands. 3/4 of all streets in the Netherlands are 30 kilometers an hour or less. In the city of Amsterdam, the entire city center is set at 30 kilometers an hour, and that has resulted in decreases in injuries of 25% in those slow speed zones. In the UK, they've been implementing neighborhood slow zones over the past decade or so and have seen significant benefits in terms of reductions in injuries and fatalities. And in fact, a 46% reduction in people who are killed or seriously injured as compared to areas that didn't have neighborhood slow zones. And they didn't see collision migration, and they also saw speed reductions of 9 miles per hour. Sorry, I didn't do the conversion there. So what does a neighborhood slow zone look like? There's a number of design features that are included when we look at these neighborhood slow zones. The first is creating gateway treatment. So at the entrance to a neighborhood or a slow speed zone, really creating design cues so it's clear to all road users that they're entering a place that's different and has slower speeds. Things like road narrowings through physical measures. You can see in the picture here, planters or concrete posts here to help narrow the road. Have clear signage. There's posted speed limit signage, as well as the blue signs there that indicate you're entering a slow zone. So it's clear to all road users. And then having 1 to 2 parking spaces, what we call daylighted at each gateway to improve visibility as people are entering into those slow zones. So it makes it very clear to all road users they're entering a different environment and need to behave accordingly. It's important to have pavement markings. So some examples here in the UK of these 20 miles per hour or 30 kilometers per hour, essentially the same speed limit here, to make it very, very clear with very prominent pavement markings to indicate you're in this slow speed environment. Traffic calming is really, really critical to the success of neighborhood slow zones. A number of different traffic calming features are typically used. Things like raised crosswalks, raised intersections, speed humps, and chicanes are some of the most common treatments that are used. And a number of other treatments looking at opportunities to narrow streets, and again, have a bit of chicanes like you can see in the image on the left here, and even different texture in the roadway, which really creates those cues and signals that you're in a different environment and should travel more slowly. So a few case studies to show what are the effectiveness of neighborhood slow zones in a number of cities around the world. I mentioned the UK has a lot of examples of neighborhood slow zones. There's hundreds of these throughout the UK, and specifically London has implemented more than 400 20-mile-per-hour or 30-kilometer-an-hour zones since 2001. And as I mentioned earlier, the injury outcomes are really significant. They've seen serious traffic injuries and fatalities decrease by 46% within those zones. Deaths and serious injuries by children have dropped by 50%. And they've also seen that there hasn't been a significant spillover effect in other areas. These two images on the right here show some examples of some of the signage and pavement markings and the gateway treatments that are used there. And then the table here is kind of showing an example of the types of traffic calming treatments that they've used, and these have been really effective. So vertical measures, again, things like speed humps and speed cushions and raised crosswalks, as well as horizontal deflection measures, things like curb extensions, pedestrian refuge islands, and diverters. New York is another example that has implemented neighborhood slow zones. In New York, it's more of a community-based program where residents or neighborhoods can actually apply to the city of New York to go through a neighborhood slow zone program. This is the application form and the website on the city's webpage here. New York has implemented 28 slow zones in 5 boroughs, all 5 boroughs of the city, and they're on an average about 25 city blocks in size. And they've seen some benefits as well, 10 to 15% decrease in speeds, 14% reduction in crashes with injuries, and 31% reduction in vehicle injuries. The numbers aren't quite as significant as what London has seen, mainly because New York hasn't implemented traffic calming measures to the same degree as London. And so they haven't seen quite as significant benefits in terms of injury reduction. We have some examples in Canada. Ottawa just recently implemented neighborhood slow zones in 2 neighborhoods, the Sandy Hill and Centertown neighborhoods. And in these cases, they reduced the default speed limit, again, from 50 kilometers to either 30 or 40 kilometers, as you can see from the photo here. And these changes were required provincial legislation for the city to actually enact these. They just implemented them in 2018, so we don't have any outcome results yet, but it's an example of a case study in Canada. Boston just recently changed their default speed limit, not just in a neighborhood, but across the entire city, and changed their speed limit from 35 to 25, actually, that should say, miles per hour. And a research study showed the odds of a vehicle exceeding 35 miles per hour fell by nearly 1/3 as a result of that change. And then finally, there is an example here in British Columbia. Rossland reduced its default speed limit from 40 to 30 kilometers an hour recently. And they've actually further reduced those in some other areas in proximity to school zones with a speed limit of 20 kilometers an hour. And in some drop-off zones, actually reducing that to a maximum of 15 kilometers an hour as well. So there's examples we can look to locally as well. And I wanted to leave with this quote here from Rod King, who's involved with the 20s Plenty movement in the United Kingdom. And without reading the whole quote here, it's really focusing on our vulnerable road users and really thinking about this as to how we design our communities. And it's really an equity issue here. And how do we make our communities, our neighborhoods safe and comfortable, whether it's an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old, and really looking at that as just a fundamental way for how we design our communities and what our values are as a society. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm Michael Schwant, public health physician with the BC Centre for Disease Control. And having worked with a couple of jurisdictions in Canada, including Fraser Health, that include large urban and rural components, it's a great opportunity to come to talk to you about the rural side of the speed piece of this. So if we can have the first slide up, I'll get right into it. There we are. So if I could just start with this video, it's brief, and I think that you'll find it's a helpful introduction to this segment.
Speed on the map is around about where most country towns have funny names, but speed's just a bit different.
Well, they just say, I didn't ask you what you're on, I said, where are you from?
Speeding through speed is probably something that some people think is a great idea, but we don't think so.
We're in very open country, so therefore you think the road is all yours.
People are a bit tired and think, well, nobody lives here. It's just a small town, but we live here.
There's too many people getting.
Of likes on Facebook, and the TAC will donate to our Lions Club. Please vote now.
So based on a couple of visual and auditory cues, you may have realized that was not a Canadian example, but a number of the principles
With Wix, you can create
should be applicable here. Now, I will belabor this point just briefly. You've heard it throughout the day, but speed is such an important factor in road traffic collisions for a number of reasons, including the reduced opportunity to respond to unexpected events on a sheer physical basis, the difficulty and longer stopping distances, and certainly greater severity of impacts when a collision does occur. You've seen a similar graph to this from Brian, and that's there for a reason. If there's a number of studies replicating this kind of analysis, finding that there's a severe increase in the impact of collisions and the probability of death right around where we're often talking about reducing speeds in our communities. Putting that in a more human context, this is a figure from a local community-based organization that really wanted to communicate that the majority of crashes, in fact, the vast majority at 60 kilometers an hour in excess of that do result in deaths, whereas at lower speeds around 30 kilometers an hour, a large majority will in fact survive, and we can start to reduce the percentage of people that might have a severe injury too. So there's a lot to be gained from reducing speed right in that pocket. So naturally enough, our own provincial health officer, who you heard from this morning, the team that they've worked on, had specific recommendations around reductions in speed, noting that this is the largest contributing factor to motor vehicle collision fatalities in British Columbia. So I won't read each of these out to you right now. You can see them there, but they did get into issues of road conditions, and as well as that enhanced approaches to enforcement. So Brian brought up Rossland, which I want to contend in our urban-rural dichotomy. In BC, Rossland is a rural community. It's a couple of thousand people only. But I'm glad that you introduced it. One of the important notes with this is that it took a bit of certainly municipal courage. It's a bit of a distinction within BC to see municipal governments actually taking the lead in reducing speeds. We see Vancouver as an urban example, reducing speeds in specific areas, Victoria as well, and other cities. And then communities like Rossland or Sydney, BC, looking at their entire communities or specific areas for reductions. And for some of the opposition that might sometimes mention this can slow down the expedience of moving people or goods to where they need to be, the mayor of Rossland actually had the answer that they took a look and nobody in Rossland would take more than 3 minutes to make it to the highway from their home in any case. So it's not always just a one-way and positive direction in terms of policies that affect health. And we've heard earlier about the increase in 2014 to highway speeds or posted speed limits in a number of highway segments within British Columbia. So a variety of analyses followed that, and one of which you'll see a headline regarding here. Did find that in a number of those segments and overall, in fact, there were increases in collisions, including fatal collisions, on a number of these stretches of highway. So we've seen a response in clawing back some of those speed limit increases, which is a positive measure from a public health perspective, as well as a number of other design interventions. But again, as you heard from our provincial health officer this morning, many in the public health community would say that we should be anticipating this in the first place and not only acting in a reactive way when we have good evidence that can guide our design to begin with. So you already heard a little bit about the toolbox for managing speeds from Brian. So I'll touch on this briefly because a lot of the same tools that can apply in urban contexts are also very helpful rurally. Of course, education and people being aware of the safe speeds for conditions is very important. In rural contexts, we know that the actual weather conditions, which can vary from season to season, week to week, and even day to day, are very important. And so posted limits can help to inform people of the appropriate speeds for a given moment. As well as that, there are designs that can help to self-enforce the desired speeds, both within communities And finally, different point of use reminders can help as well. So you'll see in this case, the introduction of some visual friction in the middle of a highway without actually restricting the space substantially can actually create just a greater sensation of speed in an area where there might be an enhanced caution necessary. And then finally, of course, trying to separate vulnerable road users from vehicles at speed is very important, as you've been hearing throughout the day. So moving on to enforcement, perhaps less beloved of an E than the environmental interventions. It's very important to note that we can try to limit speeds within the communities that people are moving around in, but inevitably when people need to move between these communities, the interventions to decrease speeds on highways, we found that enforcement becomes very key, and it's actually quite a crucial feature to trying to reduce speeds in those contexts. And I wanted to talk a little bit about automated enforcement in particular today. Just as a quick definition, it's a lot like it sounds like from the name. This involves devices that record the speeds of vehicles, the locations that at which they're documented, and can issue tickets, fines, when these parameters, i.e. the speed limits, are violated. This is an example of a ticket. It's not mine. This is from Manitoba. And this is just something that would be mailed much the same way if somebody runs through a red light camera in BC, they would expect to, or they might receive one of these in the mail. And so it's assessed towards the owner of the vehicle to whom it's registered, not because the driver themselves can't be identified, but it's a really reasonably straightforward process. Again, the same way that our red light cameras work. So why automated and not only live and in person with police involved? One of the notes about this is that these can be very effective. You see a broad range there in terms of some of the literature that show that this could be 10 to 50% effective. And this has to do with the variation between the different programs. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the best practices in automated enforcement programs. But we can really see quite a large effectiveness on reducing speeds when these are implemented appropriately. Certainly can reduce risk for police officers in that it doesn't require somebody to be conducting a roadside stop, which is certainly, it can be a positive thing, is cost effective in terms of avoiding that human work, and it can realize a large opportunity cost in terms of those resources being directed elsewhere, including to road safety. So there's a few different types to be aware of in terms of automated speed enforcement. We have intersection safety cameras. So these would be cameras that are based similar to red light cameras. They can be termed speed on green just as a shorthand. And these are cameras that are capturing the speed of cars that pass through a green light. Then we have stationary cameras. These could be single points that are fixed and well marked, or they could be rotated through a variety of locations. So for example, knowing that school zones could potentially be the sites of mobile cameras can help people to be aware that those are the sites of potential automated enforcement. And then there's increasing discussion of point-to-point enforcement. These are also sometimes called section control or average speed over distance. It's the most literal description of it. And this involves taking two different photographs or even more of a vehicle that's traveling, documenting the time between those points, and then calculating the speed at which the vehicle averaged over that stretch. So it's not looking at an instantaneous point at just one site, but actually how fast somebody has covered that segment. So it has the benefit of looking at that entire exposure of risk, both to the driver and to the other road users that they might be exposing that speed to. And this has actually been embraced or advocated for by a number of local jurisdictions. So we see here just an example of that. The Mayor of Lions Bay actually advocating for this to be enforced on a stretch of highway that's been found on an ongoing way to be quite dangerous in terms of fatalities. And some of the neighboring jurisdictions have made similar advocacy efforts towards the provincial government and partner agencies. Again, just speaking about the underlying red light camera, we have this in many different communities, dozens and dozens of cameras, and still with municipal governments actually asking for more of them. So although people generally don't like to get a ticket, aside from that, there's actually a large public acceptance for these programs. Looking at the history of automated speed enforcement in BC, some of you will know that there was a program implemented for some time. I won't go through the details of the cost effectiveness studies, but for a reasonably low amounts of money relative to the benefits, this study found this intervention to be quite cost effective. I'm trying to get through to some of the key points about these systems, so I won't go into the details, but if you're interested, please come to talk with me afterwards. The avoided costs in terms of claims alone turned out to be enough to pay for the program. Now, researchers at the BC Injury Research and Prevention Unit associated with BC CDC, health regions, and other partners have conducted research looking at the best practices in these automated speed enforcement programs, whether in Canada or internationally in some of our peer jurisdictions. So they look closely at documentation that was available online, requesting it from people involved with the programs to dig into what were the factors associated with successfully implemented programs, because there's been some like BC that were implemented and not successfully if they weren't persistent. And there is survey data out there looking at what do people say that they would want in a program or what would they object to. But this is really getting into the actual features that seem to be common to the programs that have had staying power. So I've divided these down into what the research described as critical program characteristics, and what I'll call, for the sake of this presentation, the 5 keys to a successful program. And they're listed out there, and I'll go through them quickly here. The first one of those is no surprises. There's often an idea with automated speed enforcement, this idea of being caught, of being surprised, driving along and getting a ticket in the mail 2 weeks later with no idea where that came from. It's absolutely crucial, both for the acceptability of these programs and their effectiveness, that people know where the enforcement will be taking place, what the limits are, and when to expect them. The idea is that people will slow down and avoid them, not that we're going to be catching people by surprise and finding them without any expectation. Related to that, this idea of revenue transparency is very important. There's a lot of documentation that we've came across that's found that when these programs are described as cash grabs, when they're described in that way, they tend to be not very popular and not gain a lot of public buy-in. When it's clear that the revenue that's gathered from them is going back into the same public good, the same goal that's been accepted by most of the population, which is, of course, preventing road deaths, we see a much greater buy-in in those programs. And this is analogous to in many jurisdictions where we see lottery funding that's paying for arts, social, and cultural goods. And it's almost branded in that way so that people know what this money is going to. So it's certainly to be avoided, the perception that the money is going into a specific general revenue or a perceived slush fund just towards general government coffers. The effectiveness of the programs is absolutely key, and transparency related to that is important. Where these programs gain best acceptability is when the data is actually demonstrated on a program-wide and a per-camera basis, that we can say these are actually working, and if they're not working, that we can adapt and change them. So deciding on the sites where they're going to have the most impact and being transparent about that with the public is very key. If people know that this is working, the acceptance was likely to be increased. Related to that, this idea of community engagement is very critical. From the very beginning, the implementation of programs, the selection of sites, just giving some online examples from Australian jurisdictions, or employing local opinion leaders to help with the popularization of the program can all be helpful moves. Just dropping this in without engaging communities can be very challenging. It actually provides an opportunity to enhance the effectiveness of the program when we have feedback on what are the best sites for these to be, and how can we make the program better known to people. And then finally, the technical design of the cameras themselves. This is not ideal technical design. This is somewhat better. And it's not just a matter of aesthetics. It's very important that people have a belief in these systems. They're not going to give a false positive in terms of an elevated speed reading, and that they can trust that a ticket is genuinely deserved. When you think of automated parking, which most of us have come to accept automated parking enforcement, if you park from 11 a.m. to 12 noon, have paid for an hour, and then you get a ticket when you know you've come in time, this is not a system that you're going to be comfortable with. And if even a very small fraction of these sorts of tickets are overturned or challenged, it does a long way to eroding the confidence in the program. So these need to be independently verified in terms of their technical specifications. And where there's a margin of error, the threshold for penalties needs to be developed with regard to that. So just to sum up, again, safe speeds are absolutely crucial to decreasing the frequency and severity of road collisions. We have a whole variety, a whole toolbox to employ in managing the speeds, including enforcement. And there's a variety of known program characteristics that can lead to us doing that successfully in terms of automated speed enforcement. So thanks very much. I appreciate that we're bordering on the last presentation before a break time. So thanks very much for bearing with us.
We're what? So there's no questions? Okay, thank you very much, guys.
Okay, because I do want to get everybody out here in time. All right. So we do have one final presentation. We did feel that it was quite important that, everything that we're talking about today, of course, it costs money. So there are granting programs that are available in BC. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Alan Callender from the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure, who will talk about their grants, as well as a little bit on the active transportation strategy that Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure are developing. Paul Delure from ICBC, Tobin Copley from Fraser Health and their grant program, and then Juan Solorzano and Lindsay Barnett from the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority on their grants program. So if you can just come at the stage, that'd be great. Okay, and a quick stretch. Everybody's saying a quick stretch. Jamie's like, yeah, get up. Yeah, that's it. Quick stretch. Oh, that's right. Well, that'll give time for everybody to get to the stage. Okay. Is Lindsay? What? She's here. Yeah. Okay. And where's Alan? Hi, Lindsay. Good. Welcome. Okay. Have you seen Alan? Okay. Alan? Calling Alan? Is Alan here today? No, he's not. Oh, he hasn't come. Okay, apologies. Okay, so Alan won't be with us. Okay, all right. So maybe we'll skip Alan's slides then if those were sent in. Okay, thanks. Cheers. Okay, Paul, perhaps we'll start with you. Yep, cheers. Thanks. Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I want to spend just a few minutes to describe the road improvement program at ICBC. Do you have the slides up? Great. The road improvement program is one of ICBC's road safety initiatives. And for our American friends that may be here that have heard the acronym ICBC, it's the Insurance Corporation of BC. It's a public auto insurance company, just in case we're wondering what everybody's talking about when they refer to ICBC. The road improvement program, we work with municipal road safety engineers and ministry engineers to look for investments in road infrastructure programs, projects where we can realize a reduction in collisions and thereby reducing claims costs to the corporation. In terms of the funding availability through ICBC's road improvement program, we typically have about $8 million a year. It fluctuates anywhere up to maybe about $10 million a year available throughout the province. And we break down the $8 million into municipal funding and then funding for the MOTI, or typically more rural locations. You can see on the slide, if you can read it, we have about $1.8 million for the Fraser Valley, which would include the Surrey. And Dave Hill, the engineer responsible for this area, tells me that there's about $1 million typically thereabouts dedicated to road improvement projects in Surrey. Greater Vancouver, there's about the same, about $1.7 million for the Greater Vancouver area. About $1 million for the north central and southern interior parts of the province. About $1 million for the Vancouver Island, and about $2.5 million typically for projects within the jurisdiction of the BC MOT, the Ministry of Highways. That fluctuates from year to year. And the other thing to note with the funding for the highways is that they're not all necessarily dedicated for rural highways. There might be a lot of locations where a highway cuts through a small town where the main street is the highway. So improvements could be dedicated toward improvements on that sort of roadway. I think Tarek touched on this a little bit in his presentation, talking about reactive programs. That even though there's a intention to be a little bit more proactive, it's still very important to reduce collisions. And as such, we have what we refer to as our reactive program, which is really efforts to reduce collisions, targeting these collision hotspots. About 75% of our budget is typically dedicated toward this reactive program, reducing collisions, about $6 million. And the funding provided to any municipal or ministry road improvement project is based on a expected reduction in collisions and achieving an expected rate of return to the corporation, which is typically an internal rate of return equals 50%. And this allows us, it's quite an aggressive investment target, but it allows us, or it ensures that the investments that ICBC makes in road improvements deliver effective, cost-effective returns to the corporation, recognizing that there's an obligation to the policyholders to ensure that the money is being well spent. We we're periodically, every few years, ICBC is tasked with doing an evaluation of the road improvement program. And this independent review, which is done every 3 or 4 years or so, has proven that the investments that ICBC makes in road improvements are very effective, with a return of about $4 for every $1 that ICBC invests in road improvements. The other side of the program is what we call our proactive program, which is really designed to prevent collisions. About 3 or 4 years ago, maybe, we were concerned that we were getting lots of requests from municipalities and the ministry that there were some locations that were high risk, but when we went back to assess them, there were very few collisions. And because of that, we were unable to dedicate funding for those types of improvements as part of the collision reduction program. So we thought, well, in an attempt to be proactive and try to prevent collisions, let's dedicate some of our funding towards that. So we dedicate about 25% of our funding, about $2 million a year, for collision prevention. And typically, these are targeted at a lot of cyclists projects, a lot of pedestrian projects, locations where there's typically a lack of a lot of clustering, a concentration of these types of collisions. It allows us to spend some money in order to prevent those types of collisions. We do an assessment of risk in order to gain a better, to make a little bit more of a systematic process on how we allocate funding for the proactive program without the presence of collisions. And it's really based on a function of risk, the exposure to a hazard, the probability of encountering a hazard, and then the consequence should an incident occur. For the reactive program, there's a lot of different things that we typically do. A lot of intersection design, roundabouts would be included. Lots of projects related to the installation of signals or improvements to signals, signing and pavement markings, lighting, pavement treatments. Those are typically more of an urban context, but then in a rural context, things like rumble strips, median design, roadside safety, speed control, those sorts of things. And then for as I mentioned, the proactive program typically is more the pedestrian types of facilities, crosswalks, paths, and those sorts of things, and then different types of cyclist facilities. But it's not necessarily limited to those pedestrian and cyclists. In terms of getting ICBC money, there's a very simple application process. For the municipalities, it's typically a one-page form. Basically, we just want to know, where is it? What are you doing? What's it going to cost? there are other partners that might be involved in the project. And that's really about it. And our team of municipal road safety engineers at ICBC will meet with their counterparts in the municipalities to go over the different projects and identify the ones that are most appropriate for ICBC to contribute to. I've listed our team of 4 engineers on this slide, and probably a lot of the municipal engineers in the room will recognize their partner. One, Elson Wong for the Greater Vancouver, Dave Hill for Fraser Valley, Peggy Margaret Gibbs for Vancouver Island, and Dave Dean for this North and Southern Interior. Same thing with the Ministry of Transportation Highways. It's a simple 2-page form, basically filling in the blanks, how much, where is it, what are you doing, those kinds of things. It's a little bit different form. It's developed in partnership with the Ministry of Transportation, but again, it's fairly straightforward. And then there's an interaction between myself that's responsible for the ministry projects and the folks at the Ministry of Highways for identifying the most suitable projects. One last thing about the road improvement program. It is we do provide this $8 million of funding for municipalities in the province, but we do also provide other assistance, things like crash data. Our team also does road safety audits for municipalities. We do traffic safety and operational reviews, typically for some of the smaller municipalities that may not have the expertise or wherewithal to do these sorts of things on their own. We also have a program where we retain a consultant and some of our staff to go and do road sign and pavement marking reviews, which is a real detailed review of the signing and pavement marking within a municipality, typically, again, a smaller municipality, to look for opportunities to make improvements. We're also always interested in innovative funding. ICBC is in a fortunate position is that we have no jurisdiction over the roadway. And because of that, we have no real hesitation to try new technologies and new things, given that the onus is on the road authority to make these improvements. So we're always keen on trying new things. And finally, we like to partner with the universities to do specific targeted road safety research that helps us gain a greater understanding of the link between what we do, the types of countermeasures we implement, and the effects on safety. All right.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. We are your next door neighbors, the health authority to the west of Fraser Health, and it's Vancouver Coastal Health. It runs from Richmond all the way up north to the Central Coast. My name is Juan Solórzano. I'm the Executive Director for Population Health, and with me is Lindsay Barnett, who is a member of our Community Investments team. And I would also like to acknowledge some colleagues in the room, our medical health officers, population health specialists, and environmental health specialists who will be a resource to you as you embark on this Vision Zero journey. I encourage you to reach out to them, introduce yourself, and make those connections. Similar to Fraser Health, as you will be hearing shortly, we are committed to eliminating road fatalities and serious injuries. And to this purpose, this year we're launching our Vision Zero grants. Our goal is to mobilize road safety actions across our region. The grant program is offered in partnership with the Public Health Agency of BC, and the funding is available to local governments, regional districts, as well as First Nations governments in the region that we serve. We encourage local governments to partner with community organizations as in their grant applications. And hopefully we are able to do through this new grant stream. Our goal is to increase awareness and local capacity for road safety actions, to help mobilize healthy public policy in road safety and strengthen the collaborations between our health authority and the communities that we serve.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Juan. I'm Lindsay, and I work on our community investments team. So I work specifically in our granting program. So I just wanted to tell you all a little bit more about the program. So we have a total of $35,000 available across the VCH region. Grants are anticipated to range between $3,000 and $15,000 with a median value of $5,000. Projects that are exceptional with a significant community impact demonstrated will be eligible for funding beyond $5,000. And some examples of how we anticipate this funding may be used include advocacy such as policy reform, capacity building such as community engagement, or training activities and action planning activities. So an example of that would be developing a local Vision Zero strategy. So pretty broad, we're open to a lot of ideas. And as Juan mentioned, this is our first time running this grant. So we're really looking forward to seeing what kind of innovative approaches there are to helping to reduce traffic injuries and fatalities. So just going to run through some of the dates here to give you a sense of our timeline. So our application deadline is March 31st. We really want to encourage any applicants to connect with their healthy community leads or Aboriginal leads. Contact information is listed in our application to get support in developing their proposals. So we really encourage you, like I said, to connect with a team member at VCH. We'll be notifying all applicants of final decisions in mid-May, with project durations expected to extend between June 1st and the end of June next year. There will be a fairly brief report that we'll request, just outlining successes, challenges, and what you hope to do to sustain or build on the impact of the project, which will be due at the end of next summer. So keeping it pretty short here, we encourage you to visit our website, pretty easy to remember, www.vch.ca/grants. We've got our application form ready to go online, so you can download it, get some more information. There's also lots of contact details on there. Again, for our healthy community leads or Aboriginal leads, as well as for myself and the community investments team if you need help with your application or submitting your application. So everything to be submitted by email, fairly straightforward, and any questions can be directed to either us or Healthy Communities. All right, thanks everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Tobin Copley from Fraser Health. How are we for time now? Okay, that's great. Yeah, so thanks. I think it's been a really great day here, and I'm not going to go on too long because I know we've been sitting here for quite a while and probably needing a break. But I think I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk to you about a grant opportunity we have here with Fraser Health, where we have a chance to bring forward some of the ideas we've been talking about today, changing the conversation from sort of a traditional education and enforcement focused approach to incorporating more Vision Zero kind of principles and the Safe Systems approach. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here and to talk to you about this opportunity we've developed that we really hope will help bring together people who are concerned about road safety in their community, who want to make a change, and who want to engage with others to make the roads safer. And one of the things I want to point out about our Fraser Health grant is that we are not interested in just focusing on funding just municipalities and more formal organizations. We're actually really welcoming proposals from community groups as well, because we want to foster these conversations about road safety in the community. That's a really important part for us, and to make the Vision Zero approach central in these discussions, and to support people with this funding as they move from being concerned about an issue, a road safety issue, to working together towards taking action. And you mentioned the geography. I think that's an important thing here so we don't have confusion. With Fraser Health, just for maybe not everyone in the room knows, Fraser Health is a large geographic area in the province. It's the largest health authority in the province. It comprises basically all the communities that are east of Vancouver, south of Richmond, and all the way up the Fraser Valley as far as Boston Bar. And so my colleagues here at Vancouver Coastal Health have already talked about areas within their jurisdiction to our west. Okay, so when I talk about the Vision Zero approach with respect to this grant, what do I actually mean? I mean that we invite proposals that should address 3 of the safe systems approach pillars. Safe vehicles are pretty much outside of the scope of this kind of grant. So we're going to be focusing on safe roads, safe users, and safe speeds. And we talked about that earlier today. And we're also prioritizing vulnerable road users. So pedestrians and cyclists, and also looking at these vulnerable members of our population, children, youth, older adults, and people with mobility or sensory challenges. Big question around funding and eligibility. I'm sure you all want to know. We also have $35,000 in total funding available. And as a guideline, we're encouraging applications of up to about $5,000 per grant. But again, similar to Vancouver Coastal Health, we will consider larger funding based on the scale or effectiveness of proposed projects or a level of collaboration between groups. As I pointed out, the eligibility, we explicitly invite applications from community organizations and not just more formalized organizations, but of course also from municipalities, regional districts, First Nations, and school districts. So yeah, application requirements, as I said, they should focus on at least one of these 3 focused areas we identified. We would really like to see proposals that are sustainable or that can be built upon. It's really something that would strengthen our proposals rather than something just a one-off that may not have continuous sustained value. It's also, we want to be able to learn from the actions that we fund. So we want to see project evaluation built into that. I should point out that we also have the support here. We have a number of our Healthy Built Environment team here at the conference. So they can provide support in addition to myself, should applicants have questions about how do I evaluate this? How do I put this in the application? How do I approach this problem? And of course, naturally, we like the implementation to be within the Fraser Health Service region. So how to apply for it? Steps are, well, hopefully those of you who are in municipalities or representing municipalities or organizations that have a presence in the Fraser Health region, hopefully you may have already heard about this grant through some of our networks. I know they've been doing a fantastic job getting the word out very quickly about this grant. If you haven't, please just contact me. I'll have my my contact information at the end of this last slide here, or reach out to our Healthy Built Environment team members or community health specialists or any of other people who are connected to the community. So then on looking at the reviewing the application, what I'd really like is that anyone who is considering applying, please just contact me. That'll help me get a gauge of the level of interest for the grants themselves, but also we can have some initial conversations about the fit of what you might be thinking about and making sure that that you are, that a proposal is really embracing safe systems principles. A really important thing is to point out is our funding application deadline. It is different than the one from Vancouver Coastal Health. The two programs have very similar names. Please don't get them mixed up, because our program has a significantly earlier application deadline. And we have a hard deadline because we need to administer this funding by the end of this fiscal year, at the end of March 31st. So our deadline is March 1st this year. Yours is in May? March, end of March. So it's quite a bit earlier. So March 1st, it's important. And we are going to go through the adjudication process very quickly. So we hope to notify the applicants of the funding decision by March 11th. So we're going to have a very fast turnaround. The projects need to be completed by the end of fiscal year in 2020. That's March 31st, 2020. So yeah, that's basically a rundown on our grant application, our grant process. This is my contact information. Please invite anyone to phone me, email me, or just grab me and buttonhole me after our session here, or I will be around tomorrow as well, or any of our Healthy Built Environment team members who are also here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Yes. Thanks, guys. That's great. Cheers. You're released. Okay, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. That's the end of our day one session. Remember, there is day two tomorrow. The interest in this event and the turnout really has been remarkable. We didn't know how many people were actually going to come. You know, this is a first ever summit. So thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest. Thank you to Shabnam and to Jamie and to your team for hosting the event here in Surrey. This has been such a large undertaking. And congratulations on launching Vision Zero today. What a great event, what a great moment. So much work has gone into this. It's great. It's good. Thank you to all of our speakers. You have all shared your knowledge and wisdom about what it truly means to work on Vision Zero, from the evidence, the challenges, the opportunities. It's just been fantastic. Next week, just a point to draw your attention to. Next week, you'll all receive a post-summit survey by email. So I encourage you to complete it. Tell us what you think about today and tomorrow. Should we have another summit? Should we have some workshops? Should we form a community of practice? We would really like to know. So that would be great if you could fill that out. It should be coming out Wednesday or Thursday next week. Cheers. Jamie?
Thank you, Megan. I'd like to echo the comments in terms of it was a great group of speakers. We really valued everybody's attendance here today. I think it covered very well Vision Zero and the safe systems approach. I wanted to share kind of 3 takeaways, I guess, that I saw from it. All of these collisions are preventable. We need to use data. We need to use the tools that are out there in terms of analytics, in terms of predicting collisions, to really make a difference. Speed kills. We need to all work hard to try to implement the right speed limits, get people driving the right speeds, reduce those fatalities and injuries. And the third one was the collaboration. We heard from San Francisco, the great strides they've made with the incredible collaboration between health, between road experts and others. And the need to focus not just on actions that we can take, but also trying to get policies changed and higher level changes of behavior. And that's only going to happen if we all work together. Finally, I wanted to thank Fraser Health, Vancouver Coastal Health, BC Centre for Disease Control, and the Provincial Health Services Authority for all of their help in putting this together, and in particular, Megan Oakley and Tobin Copley. Without your guys' help, this wouldn't have happened. Finally, we'd like to invite everybody to stay a little longer. I know everybody's probably kind of tired already, but we will have a mixer next door in the Boulevard Ballroom, and you should have a drink ticket inside your little package. And we'd love to see you over there to chat a little further on everything you've heard today. And then we'll see you back here tomorrow, hopefully. If you looked in the program, we have a number of excellent speakers again tomorrow. So I think it'll be a really great day. Thank you.
But these
Then Karst will know what I was doing. How's that light over there? Is it a bit bright? Is it a bit bright? Oh my goodness. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jamie.